Hi everybody, Steve Griffiths here, developer of the MTPredictor software program. In today's video I'd like to have another look at the YM and see how it unfolded yesterday, which was the 11th of August. In the last couple of videos we've actually had some very good and a lot easier days over the last week. We've had some very good profitable trades. So yesterday was a little bit harder. Well, it was a little bit harder for the newer traders, and this is what I want to look at. In yesterday's webinar I was particularly focusing on the YM and particularly this potential DP sell setup here. The reason I was looking at this as opposed to being a blue STF uptrend is because if we go to the higher time frame chart, in the webinar I went back to this pivot here and I placed the decision point on, which is an area that's in advance. It's a leading indicator that gives you area of support and resistance, and as you can see that actually held yesterday's high on the YM. So if I go to the 3-minute chart, you can now see that this DP sell here was actually in 15-minute resistance. Therefore I was looking at it in yesterday's webinar that it was one that maybe the more experienced or advanced MTPredictor customers could consider. My only cravat to this, or my only exception to this, was because the ES, which is the boss, at the time the DP sell came in on the YM, which was around here, wasn't at its 15-minute resistance. You can see it hadn't quite got it up there. I was suggesting that you'd probably be more cautious with this, and actually in the webinar I suggested you bring your stop to break even, and as such this was a break even trade. So it's good to show a trade that basically was stopped out for nothing. If you'd held it a little bit longer, you can see the market came down to this area here. If I put the Elliott waves on, you can see that this actually came down to an ABC correction before the trend actually continued a bit higher. I'm just going to take this across a bit to there, and I want to show you what happened after that. So let's just remove the analysis. There we go, and we'll just take those Elliott waves off as well. Right, the market then carried on a bit higher, and if I place the manual DP from this pivot, you can see it came up and made a high there very, very nicely indeed. For more standard traders, because this was also at 15-minute resistance, the larger trend would be deemed to be down, therefore you would not be considering this buy setup. However, there was a nice TS4 sell a bit later in the day. If we place the analysis on here, you can see actually came down into, didn't quite reach the first target, but came down to on the close a 1.6 hour profit. So it would have been a nice little profit there a bit later in the day. So that would have been quite nice. But what I want to show you for the more experienced MTPredictor customers, I'm just going to clear this analysis off again, was what happened a bit later around here. Now this was at 12:45 New York time. Now what we like to look for is I particularly like to look for what I call a holy grail trade setup. I like to have a major high. In other words, this pivot here was at a high on a 15-minute DP. You can see there's our 15-minute DP there, and it was also at a shorter term DP, and also if we go to the ES, there's the same high there. It was within a whisker of its decision point. In other words, it's pretty close to its decision point resistance area there. So what I like to do is, rather than trying to pick the high, because that's quite dangerous unless you get an automatic setup like we had a bit earlier around at 10 o'clock, what I like to see is I like to see an initial decline down, which we had here, an initial rally up. Now in Elliott wave terms, this is normally a wave 2, or 2OB, or you can see here, but it's a wave 2 because it's coming off an important high. Then the decline down here, which you can see unfolded, if I do Elliott wave intermediate, very often be a wave 3. So we're looking for a major high, an initial decline, wave 1, an initial correction, wave 2, and then a wave 3 type swing. But the trick to the trade setup is this wave 2 should subdivide into a smaller or lesser degree ABC pattern. For this, sometimes we have to go down to the shorter time frame chart. So let's see where this came in. This was around about 12:45. So if we now go down to the shorter term 2-minute chart, you can see this is exactly what happened. There's our major high on our 15-minute and our 3-minute high. Here's the initial decline. Here's the initial correction. There was an initial setup here that came in and would have been stopped out by one tick. That's very, very frustrating. The setup then came in again, at this particular level here, and as you can see the market actually went down beautifully right into the typical wave 3 WPT, where a potential 6.3 hour profit, you can see it there, a potential 6.3 hour profit was available. So this was a good trade setup, which we call our Holy Grail trade setup for the more experienced and slightly more aggressive traders among you. So I just thought it was a good example to see how these Holy Grail trade setups do unfold again and again. But the only reason I was looking for that later in the day was because the YM made another high at about 20 past 11 here in its 15-minute DP. So this was in its 15-minute DP resistance. We also had another shorter term DP resistance there, and also the most important thing was about the same time, which was around here 11:20, the ES was just about in its DP resistance. It was within a tick or so of that level as well. So a good trade setup there, showing a Holy Grail trade setup. But if you had missed that and you're a slightly more conservative trader, let's just clear everything off here. As I've already shown, let's go back to the 15-minute chart. It was a slightly harder day yesterday, where we would have actually had the 15-minute resistance level on from that high. Just drag that across. You can see that down on the shorter term chart. I'll now go down to the 3-minute chart. You can see there was our 15-minute resistance, where the first attempt at a short trade off that was our DP here. And as I've already suggested, because that the ES hadn't reached its resistance level, you'd probably want to bring your stop to break even once you reach the 100% initial risk level. So this would have been stopped out for a break even trade or nothing. That's what I was suggesting in the webinar, yesterday's training webinar for customers. But later on in the day there was another short setup. Remember, we're looking for short setups, not buy setups, because of the large degree resistance, therefore the large degree trend was down. So there was a trade a bit later in the day that would have made a small 1.6 hour profit. So overall, a slightly harder day than we've had a bit earlier in the week, and that is just a good example of the cyclical nature of trading, in that some days are a lot easier than others, other days are harder, where you have to do a lot more work or you have to be a lot more patient, and obviously you get days when there's losing trades, and that's just the cycle that the markets go around with again and again and again. So I thought it's very important to do a video on what would have been a slightly harder day for MTPredictor on the USE minis yesterday, which was the 11th of August.